Did you know there's a new teaching in Christianity that's actually keeping many people in atheism? Hey, yo, what's up? If you're new here, I'm Tyler. This is The Table. We talk about God and His church. Little story about me. I've been in ministry for 15 years, and about 4.5 years ago, I began to have a real crisis of faith. I really began to have some serious doubts on if any of this stuff is actually real. Well, long story short, and I will tell that story one day, I eventually came out of that time of skepticism and deconstruction, whatever you want to call it, and I had a huge thing from the church that really helped me come out of that place of skepticism. What I began to learn over the last couple of years actually is that much of the church refuses this teaching and actually pushes back. And I am seeing the ripple effects of it, that it's actually keeping many people in atheism. Now you're thinking, how can the church keep people in atheism? Well, both atheism and this church teaching are predicated on a very simple statement. And that statement is that miracles are not happening today. The atheist obviously says miracles aren't happening because God's not real. And then the doctrine of cessationism, which is the church teaching, also teaches that miracles are not happening today. Healing is not happening today. Prophetic words are not happening today. Speaking in tongues are not happening today. The list goes on. They're not happening today. The doctrine of cessationism believes that the gifts of the Spirit ended with the apostles in the New Testament. So after the apostles died, the 12 apostles, you know the story, after they all died or got martyred or whatever, essentially the gifts kind of fizzled out with them. The problem is there is literally no biblical teaching. There's not one verse in the entire Bible that says this. This is a completely man-made doctrine. We're going to get into how and when man made it. If you're interested in diving into the nitty-gritty about all that stuff, I want to encourage you to find Remnant Radio. Hopefully we'll populate a video of them here, and I'll put a link down there to the channel. They are actually just responding to an entire documentary that people made called Cessationism, or cessationist, whatever. And they actually debunk every single argument that the cessationist brings up. So you're asking, where did this thing come from? You're saying it's new, you're saying it's novel, you're saying it's not always been around, you're saying it's not even in the Bible. Then how are people teaching it? It's a major teaching in the church of many denominations, many churches, hundreds of thousands of people, probably millions, believe this and hold to it. You're like, how does this happen? Let me tell you. So if we travel back in time about 500 years to the country of Germany, we're going to find a man named Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a Catholic. He worked for the church, but he had some issues with the church. He didn't like a lot of the things the church was doing, indulgences, a lot of stuff we're not going to get into today. So he writes and nails his 95 Theses on the church wall, church door, and so begins what we call the Reformation. It's where we get Protestants, so all the churches that aren't Catholic. It's where this came from, most of them at least. So the Catholic Church didn't like this, obviously. They don't like people separating. And so one of the things they did was they began to argue with him, and they said, hey, you're saying we're doing all these things wrong. You're saying that we're not the true church, blah, 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 blah. How can you argue, though, if we have all these miracles? The church, the Catholic Church, had been doing miracles for thousands of years, for 1,500 years almost. The Catholic Church had been doing miracles, sometimes more, sometimes less, but needless to say, there have been miracles. And so they write to him and they're like, hey, what about the miracles? Doesn't that prove God's blessing? Obviously, Martin Luther's kind of in a pinch now. He's like, oh gosh, there are these miracles. How am I going to account for this? So Martin Luther, in a plea of desperation, comes up with the doctrine of cessationism on the spot. And he says, actually, those miracles you're talking about, even those are fake. Those aren't real, because the real miracles actually died out 1,400 years prior with the last apostle. So you guys have been doing, whatever, doctrine of demons, something bad, not the real stuff. And in a moment, the doctrine of cessationism was born 1,500 years after the church birth. You're saying, that's kind of crazy. This doctrine has only been around for 500 years, but for 1,500 years and for other parts of the church 2,000 years leading up to today has practiced miracles? Yes, that's what I'm saying. Cessationism is a new and novel doctrine based on those definitions. You're saying, okay, Tyler, but you're still not answering how that affects the atheist. And you're right. One interesting thing, though, is the tie between cessationism and atheism. What's interesting is they actually are birthed around the same time. So late 1500s, Martin Luther starts the Reformation and really kicks off that. What happens about 100 years later is we get something called the French Enlightenment. And I was just looking this up on Wikipedia the other day. According to Wikipedia, the French Enlightenment is the birth of modern skepticism. It is the birth of modern atheism. Think about it. Before that, of course, you're going to have little pockets here and there of people who are atheists, who believe there's no God, all that. But the vast majority of people believed there was a God. They believed there was a God. He was divine, and he was working in the world today. The Reformation starts in the church, which is also the birth of cessationism. And then it's interesting, 100 years later, we have the birth of the modern skeptic atheistic movement. Now, yes, the French Enlightenment's brought us a lot of good stuff, but it also has been the birth of the modern atheist movement, the modern skeptic movement. Here's what struck me one day. Is it possible that because a good portion of the church was not operating in signs and wonders, it left a gap for the skeptic to then step in because there is nothing challenging their skepticism? I want to say something to you in love. For those of you who stand on the corner and hold the Bible and preach that you're going to go into hell and all this sort of stuff, I understand where you're coming from. I know the scriptures that you're using, and I understand the reasoning. I'm just telling you that's more than likely not going to win anybody over. Now, I don't want this to be heretical or sound heretical, what I'm about to say, but nobody cares about the Bible when they're an atheist. I mean, I think we all intuitively know this. Atheists don't care about the Bible. They don't believe it anyways. And let's be honest, when Paul would break into a new city in the book of Acts, he didn't take the Torah. He didn't take Deuteronomy, Leviticus. I got a Levite shirt on right now. He didn't take any of that into the... What did he take? He took signs and wonders. He says, I practice signs and wonders among you. He tells them this in the book of 1 Corinthians. He says, I did not come to you with eloquent speech, but I came to you in the power of God so that you might believe. I believe that the rise of atheism can be contributed to the rise of cessationism. When there's an opening where the skeptic is not being challenged, then any sort of possibility can flood in. I see this all the time. The gifts of the Spirit, healing, prophecy, words of knowledge, so many other things, were the main weapon that the church had on the front lines of evangelism. Jesus himself doesn't say, go into each town and preach the word. Doesn't go in each town and say, hold up the Bible, hold up the Torah, hold up the Septuagint. He says, go into each town, heal the sick, cast out devils, cleanse the leper. It is the kingdom of God. It is the intrinsic nature of the kingdom of God to advance in signs and wonders. What happened when cessationism took the forefront in the church was now we don't have the ability to show somebody an empty wheelchair. What we have to do now is either just yell at them from a Bible, or we have to try to philosophize and get intellectual. And I love that stuff. I think God can be found in the philosophy and the study of the universe. But listen, if you can argue someone into something, that means you can argue somebody out. And all you need, if you have a really good argument for God, is just a better one for the non-existence of God. And then you're just in this competing match of arguments, who can have the best argument, and that's all you see right now in like Christian versus atheist debates. And I want just a powerful spirit-filled evangelist to come in there and like raise somebody up out of a wheelchair, or open a blinded eye, or open a deaf ear and be like, okay, atheist, Deal with that. Tell me your response to that. They're not gonna have one. I've seen this in the comment section in many of my videos. In the last couple weeks, we've been doing a lot of videos on deconstruction or atheism and really trying to reach that person, the Christian primarily, who is struggling with their faith and asking a lot of questions like I was. And of course, for me, bro, I'm gonna have stuff about the gifts of the Spirit. This is part of the church's battle on the forefront of like proving that Jesus is God, is the gifts of the Spirit, the testimony of the church. And so when I have a video of Frank Turek, of John Lennox, of William Lane Craig, whoever in there, you just see the comment section fill up with going back and forth, picking apart the arguments. In a couple of my videos though, I've also included testimony of miracles, whether it's medically verified, documented miracles, or a poll that I took where 150 people out of 200 said they saw miracles on the same level as a blinded eye being opened. It's interesting, in the comment section in these videos, many people argue with the philosophical part and they rarely engage on the side of the miracles. One guy said, honestly, I can't really deny that medically verified miracle or that poll. He says, some of that has to be true and I don't really have an answer for that. And I say, yes, that is why we need the gifts of the Spirit on the forefront of evangelism. And that's why I am pretty convinced that cessationism has left the open door to the back of the house for atheism to come in. So you're like, okay, Tyler, what's the answer? What do we do? What's the response from here? I believe if we are truly going to step in to these last days, end time harvest, where a massive amount of souls come to Christ, cessationism has to be nailed to the cross and left there. That sucker has to die. And pride and arrogance on both sides of the camp, the cessationists and the people who practice the gifts of the Spirit, has to die. But the false teaching of cessationism has to die. Why? Because when the church can be fully mobilized in the gifts of the Spirit and operating in signs and wonders, we are going to see a mass explosion of souls. No, not because everybody wants to see a shiny little prophetic word or we want to be wowed or awed, but the same reason that Peter and John healed the man at the gate beautiful is to testify that Jesus Christ is Lord. That is to fulfill the words that Jesus said, that greater things than these will you do. It is a part of the atonement, and it's a part of our inheritance as the church, is signs and wonders. And every sign and wonder points to the exaltation and the majesty and the kingdom of Christ. Last thing I'll say, just like you can often see in my comment section, if you can be argued into something, you can be argued out of something. But nobody, I say nobody, argues with an empty wheelchair. The only thing you can do is harden your heart. So my prayer for you today, if you don't believe the gifts of the Spirit are real, go look up that Remnant Radio playlist. Go look up their channel. Search the scriptures for yourself. Pray, ask the Lord, reveal this to me. If this is true, show me. Search the scriptures. We need an end time harvest. Jesus says the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And so I'm praying that the Lord would grip your heart, because the epidemic of skepticism in our country can easily, I'm convinced, be remedied by the gifts of the Spirit. No, not everyone's going to believe, but many will be challenged. I hope this was encouraging. I'll see you guys next time. If you want to watch some more videos, they're right here. Check them out. Peace.